Nurse Myra Ellison froze in the doorway of the Hospital 9 unit when Atlas, the calmest military dog on the ward, stepped past 3 uniformed handlers and pressed his forehead against her trembling hand. The corridor went silent. Colonel Victor Hale looked from the dog to Myra's wet eyes and gave a small, cruel laugh. "Careful, nurse," he said, loud enough for the patients, orderlies, and soldiers to hear. Tears don't turn fiction into service history. Myra swallowed the sea rising in her throat and forced her chin up. But Atlas did not move away. Instead, the old nine lowered his nose to the colonel's leather folder, nudged loose a thin blue tag, and placed one paw over it. No growl, no bark, just a quiet guard between Myra and the man, calling her a liar. Before this story unfolds, tell us where you are watching from. Leave your country name in the comments so this community can see how far loyalty travels. And subscribe to Silent Valor 9 for stories about courage, sacrifice, hidden heroes, hospital justice, and the quiet bonds that prove the truth. The 9 recovery ward at St. Arden Military Hospital was always kept spotless. The floors shone like still water. The white walls carried no clutter. And every doorway had a small brass plate engraved with names of dogs who had served without ever asking to be called brave. Myra Ellison knew every plate by heart. She worked the early shift there, measuring medication cups, changing linens, checking paw pads, brushing quiet coats under soft lamps, and speaking to the dogs in a voice low enough that even the most restless ones settled. To the hospital staff, she was simply Nurse Ellison, reliable, soft-spoken, always early, always willing to stay late. To Colonel Victor Hale, she was less than that. He had arrived that morning with polished boots, a hard smile, and a leather folder tucked beneath his arm. An inspection team was coming. A photographer from the base newsletter was waiting near the nurse's station. 2 junior officers stood behind him, pretending not to notice how he had already made Myra remove the service ribbon pin from her sweater. "Civilian staff don't wear military decorations in my ward," he had said. "It was given by the family," Myra answered quietly. "Then wear it at a family table, not in a military hospital." She had obeyed because she always obeyed when patients were watching. She slipped the small ribbon into her pocket and returned to the charting desk, but the humiliation stayed under her skin like heat. Dr. Priya Nair, the head of the 9 recovery program, noticed. She passed Myra a stack of clean intake forms and murmured, "Don, give him your morning." Myra gave a small nod. That was her skill, everyone said. She could take pain and fold it so neatly that no one had to look at it. By 9 o'clock, the ward entrance filled with uniforms. Soldiers lined the clean corridor. Cameras lifted, voices lowered. At the center of the attention was Atlas, a dark sable Belgian Malinois with gray around his muzzle and eyes that seemed to remember rooms before he entered them. Sergeant Caleb Rhodes, Atlas' current handler, walked beside him with a loose leash and a steady hand. Atlas had been transferred to St. Arden for long-term recovery and evaluation after years of service. He was alive, stable, dignified, and calm. He carried no dramatic sign of injury, only the slow patience of a dog who had seen more commands than applause. Myra saw him and forgot how to breathe, not because he was famous, not because everyone on base knew the name Atlas, but because for one impossible second, the years between them vanished. The dog stopped at the ward doorway. Caleb gave a gentle cue, forward. Atlas did not move. The photographer lowered his camera. Dr. Nair looked up from her clipboard. Colonel Hale's jaw tightened. "Sergeant," the colonel said, "control your dog." Caleb's cheeks reddened. "Yes, sir." Atlas forward. Atlas turned his head away from the command and looked directly at Myra. Myra gripped the edge of the medication cart. Her fingers went white. She wanted to step back. She wanted to disappear into the linen room and become what Hale always said she was. Just a nurse, Just a witness, just a woman who had cried at the wrong time and been dismissed for it. Atlas took one step toward her, then another. The entire ward watched as the old nine walked past a row of officers and stopped in front of Mara. He did not jump. He did not whine. He simply pressed his forehead against her hand, as if he had found a place he had been searching for. Mara's lips parted. "Steady, boy," she whispered before she could stop herself. Atlas closed his eyes. That tiny movement broke something inside her. Her throat tightened, her vision blurred. She felt the first tear slip free and hated herself for it. Hated the weakness of being seen. Hated that Colonel Hale was there to witness the one thing he had once used to destroy her. His laugh came softly, then louder. "Well," Hale said, turning toward the gathered staff, "that is touching. The hospital nurse has learned a trick." Mara wiped her cheek fast. "Sir, I didn't call him." "Of course you didn't." His smile sharpened. "Dogs respond to scent, voice, food, affection. They do not confirm fantasies." Dr. Nair stepped forward. "Colonel, Atlas' response is unusual. We should document." "We will document nothing until I decide it matters." Atlas lifted his head. Hale walked closer, folder tucked under his arm, voice carrying, "Let me be clear for everyone in this hallway. Nurse Ellison has previously made emotional claims regarding military events outside her authority and beyond her understanding. Those claims were reviewed and found unreliable." Mara felt the corridor tilt. The younger nurses looked at her. Soldiers shifted. Caleb's hand tightened on the leash. "Colonel," Mara said, almost too softly to hear. "Please, don't what?" Hale asked. "Tell the truth or interrupt your performance." Her face burned. The tear she had missed slid to her chin. She forced herself not to wipe it this time. If she moved, she feared her hands would shake. Atlas stepped sideways until his shoulder touched Mara's knee. Hale glanced down at the dog and smirked. "Even the nine feels sorry for you." Then the leather folder slipped slightly under his arm. A thin blue tag, no larger than a hospital wrist label, slid from between two papers and landed silently on the polished floor. No one noticed at first. No one except Atlas. The dog lowered his head. His nose touched the tag. Then he placed one paw over it and stood still. Caleb frowned. "Atlas." Mara stared at the blue edge beneath the dog's paw. Her heart began to pound with a rhythm she remembered from another hallway, another base, another morning when a man she loved had pressed something into her hand and said, "If Hale denies it, the dog will know." Hale saw where she was looking. His smirk vanished. "Pick up your animal, Sergeant," he snapped. Caleb reached for Atlas' collar, but the dog did not yield. He stayed beside Mara, paw covering the tag, body calm and firm, blocking the colonel's path. Dr. Nair crouched slowly. "What is that?" "No one touches it," Hale said. His voice was too fast. Mara heard it. So did Caleb. So did every soldier in the ward. Atlas looked up at Mara, and for the first time in 7 years, she allowed herself to look back at the dog who had been there the night her life split in two. The blue tag was not a decoration. It was a message, and Colonel Hale looked terrified that someone was about to read it. Dr. Nair asked everyone to step back. No one obeyed at first. The ward had been full of inspection posture only moments earlier, all straight shoulders and polished silence. Now every face leaned toward the floor, toward Atlas' paw, toward the thin blue tag that had made a colonel's voice crack. "Step back," Dr. Nair repeated, sharper this time. The nurses moved first, then the junior officers. Caleb loosened the leash until it formed a soft curve between his hand and Atlas' collar. He did not pull again. Mara stood with one hand braced against the medication cart. She knew how this looked, a nurse crying in a hallway, a decorated colonel angry, A famous 9 refusing command. It was the kind of scene that invited judgment before facts. Hale had built his career on that exact weakness in people. He pointed at Mara. She has no authority to interfere with a military animal. I am not interfering, Mara said. Her voice sounded steadier than she felt. Then move away. Atlas shifted before Mara did. The dog angled his body across her legs, not threatening, not lunging, simply present. A living boundary. Caleb inhaled in surprise. Atlas, he said softly. Easy. The dog remained calm. Hale's face hardened. Sergeant Rhodes, remove him. Caleb looked from the colonel to the 9. Sir, with respect, forcing him right now could escalate his stress response. Stress response? Hale said. He is a trained working dog. Yes, sir. And he is choosing a protective position without aggression. That means something. It means he has been handled poorly. Mara flinched as if the insult had struck her directly. She had spent years learning that men like Hale could turn any proof into another accusation. If the dog ignored her, she was irrelevant. If the dog recognized her, she had manipulated him. If she stayed silent, she was hiding. If she spoke, she was hysterical. The same trap, the same hallway, the same feeling of being washed while the truth died in her mouth. 7 years earlier, the hallway had been made of canvas, not polished walls. Cam Meridian had sat at the edge of a temporary airfield, a place of generators, maps, and tired faces. Mara had not been a hospital nurse then. She had been attached to a surgical support team, young enough to still believe that official reports protected the truth. Atlas had been younger too, all focused eyes and lightning-fast obedience, working beside Staff Sergeant Jonah Vale. Jonah was not a loud hero. He was the kind who checked on the quietest person in the tent, the kind who remembered how Mara took her coffee, the kind who trained Atlas with patience instead of pride. When Mara first met the dog, Atlas had ignored everyone in the medical tent until Jonah tapped 2 fingers against his thigh. Harbor, Jonah said. Atlas crossed the room and sat beside Mara's boots. Mara had laughed. What does that mean? It means he knows where safe is. She had not understood then why Jonah looked at her when he said it. Later, after the mission that official files called routine and survivors called something else, Colonel Hale told the inquiry board that Jonah had misread orders. He said Mara had been emotional, confused, and grieving. He said she had imagined a warning, invented a contradiction, and embarrassed herself by crying during testimony. Mara's statement disappeared. Jonah's name stayed stained. Atlas was reassigned before she could say goodbye, and Hale rose. Now, in the clean Hospital 9 ward, Atlas stood against her knee with the same quiet certainty he had shown in that tent. Dr. Nair crouched near the blue tag. Dr. Nair, Trotwell, Caleb, gave a low cue. Release. Atlas lifted his paw. Dr. Nair picked up the tag carefully with gloved fingers. It had been folded once, then flattened. The plastic was old, the ink faded but readable. She read silently first. Her expression changed. Hale moved toward her. That is classified material. Dr. Nair stood. It's a recovery label. Give it to me. No. The single word moved through the hall, like a door closing. Hale stared at her. Doctor, this is a medical ward, Colonel. Until I know whether this item relates to Atlas care, it stays in clinical custody. Mara could not see the words from where she stood. She did not need to. Her body already remembered the shape of the message. Jonah had once used blue recovery tags to mark field items that could not go through normal command channels. He said official paper could be redirected, but medical chain of custody had witnesses. Caleb leaned closer. What does it say? Dr. Nair hesitated. Then read aloud. Recovery item R17. To be opened if Colonel Hale denies The nurse's warning. 9 Atlas confirms handler, command harbor. Witness, M. Ellison. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of people remembering what Hale had just said. Mara felt every face turn toward her again. But the weight had changed. A moment ago, they had watched her like a woman unraveling. Now they watched her like someone standing beside a locked door. Hale laughed once, too sharply. Absurd. Anyone could write that? Mara whispered. Jonah wrote it. The colonel's eyes cut to her. You don't get to say his name in my ward. Atlas' ears lifted. Mara took one breath. He was my friend. He was a soldier under my command. He was more than a line in your report. The words surprised her. They surprised everyone. For years, Mara had spoken of Jonah only in private, and even then, rarely. Reef had made a small room inside her, and she had lived there quietly, folding sheets, checking charts, watching other people's reunions from a distance. Hale stepped closer. Staff Sergeant Vale's record. At last moved first. Again, no bark, no threat. He simply placed himself between Mara and Hale, shoulders square, eyes steady, as if the colonel had crossed an invisible line. The dog remembered. Caleb's voice dropped. Sir, stop moving. Hale froze. It was not fear of attack that stopped him. Atlas was controlled, calm, disciplined. What froze the colonel was recognition. The dog was not confused. The dog was not reacting to noise or tears. Atlas knew exactly whom he was guarding. Mara looked down and saw something else. The blue tag had left a faint smudge on the floor where it had fallen from the colonel's folder. But it should not have been in his folder at all. It should have been sealed in the missing recovery file. Dr. Nair followed Mara's gaze. Colonel, why were you carrying this? Hale's mouth tightened. Because old materials get routed to command. Then where is the rest of R-17? The question landed cleanly. Hale did not answer. Atlas turned his head toward the ward entrance, then toward the old storage corridor beyond it. He took 2 steps and stopped, looking back at Mara. Caleb frowned. He wants to lead to you what? Dr. Nair asked. Mara's pulse climbed. She remembered Jonah's voice. If Hale denies it, the dog will know. Atlas waited, and this time Mara did not step back. Let him show us, she said. The old storage corridor behind the 9 ward had been renovated twice, renamed 3 times, and forgotten by almost everyone, except nurses who needed extra blankets during night shifts. It ran behind the clean public hallway like a hidden vein, lined with locked cabinets, supply shelves, and one narrow archive room that smelled faintly of paper and disinfectant. Atlas led them there without hurry. Caleb walked beside him. Dr. Nair followed with the blue tag sealed in a transparent evidence sleeve. Mara came last at first, until Atlas stopped and looked back. He would not continue until she walked near his shoulder. Behind them, the ward remained crowded, but quieter now. The photographer had lowered his camera completely. The junior officers no longer looked at Mara with embarrassment. They looked at Colonel Hale, who followed with a face carved from stone. This is theatrical nonsense, Hale said. No one answered. That was the first shift. For years, Hale's tone had been enough to make rooms agree with him. Now his words fell against the storage corridor walls and slid away. Atlas stopped at cabinet C12. Mara knew it. Old harnesses, retired leashes, training flags, outdated supply pouches no one used but no one threw away because military hospitals archived everything. Dr. Nair checked the cabinet log. Due C12 requires dual access. I have medical access, Mara said, and I have program director access. Dr. Nair replied. Hale stepped forward. Absolutely not. Dr. Nair looked at him. You might observe, you might not obstruct. His eyes narrowed. You're making a career mistake. Maybe, she said. But I'm making it in a room full of witnesses. Caleb turned away to hide the flicker of admiration on his face. Mara keyed in her code. Dr. Nair entered hers. The cabinet unlocked with a soft click. Inside were rows of labeled canvas bags, folded vests, and old training collars. Atlas sniffed once, then sat, not at the front, at the bottom shelf. Mara knelt slowly. Her knees protested against the hard floor. She pulled out a stack of retired harness liners, then a sealed plastic pouch wedged behind them. It had no official printed label, only blue tape, R17. Her hands began to shake. Hale's voice cracked across the corridor. "Do not open that." Dr. Nair took the pouch from Mara gently. "It will be open under observation. It might contain classified operational material. Then Major Grant can determine that." Hale's eyes flickered. I call legal oversight when the tag referenced a disputed witness statement. The colonel looked toward the ward doorway. Major Elias Grant had not yet arrived, but his name changed the air. He was not loved by command officers who preferred closed doors. He had a reputation for reading every line, asking plain questions, and remembering who avoided answering them. For the first time, Mara saw Hale calculate. Not command, calculate. Dr. Nair placed the pouch on a clean metal tray from the supply room. Caleb stood by Atlas, one hand resting lightly near the dog's collar. Mara kept her distance until Dr. Nair looked at her. "You should be here," the doctor said. Mara stepped closer. Inside the pouch was a folded field intake card, a torn corner of a map, and a small laminated photograph. The photograph stole Mara's breath. Jonah stood beside Atlas under the shade of a transport vehicle, one hand on the dog's back. Mara was in the edge of the frame, laughing at something out of sight. She barely recognized herself. Young, tired, alive in a way grief had later erased. On the back, in Jonah's handwriting, were 4 words. "Mara knows the correction." Her fingers touched the tray but not the photograph. Caleb read the words and looked at her. "Correction to what?" "The report," Mara said. Hale gave a cold laugh. "There is no correction. There was a closed inquiry." Mara closed her eyes. The inquiry room came back. The metal chair, the too bright light. Hale's voice telling her to compose herself, while her whole body shook with the knowledge that Jonah would never walk in and explain. She had tried to tell them about the changed route, the delayed alert, the warning she heard over the field radio. Hale interrupted every answer. "Are you medically qualified to interpret tactical orders, Nurse Ellison?" "No, sir, but I heard." "Were you crying when you claim you heard this?" "I was upset because so grief affected your perception." After that, the board stopped writing. Dr. Nair unfolded the field intake card. Most of it was ordinary. Date, location code, transfer note. But in the lower corner, beneath a medical stamp, someone had written a sequence of numbers and a phrase. 2 knocks, harbor, blue shelf. Caleb looked at Atlas. "That's a command chain." Mara nodded. Jonah used layered cues when Atlas had to retrieve or mark something without drawing attention, like a memory route. "Not memory the way people mean it," Mara said. "Training, association, repetition, safe retrieval." Hale scoffed. "You sound rehearsed." Mara looked at him, and her fear did not disappear, but it changed shape. It became something with a spine. "I learned from the handler you blamed." Hale's jaw flexed. Then Atlas stood. He walked past the tray, past the open cabinet, past Dr. Nair, and stopped at the archive room door. He lifted one paw and tapped the bottom panel twice. 2 knocks. Caleb went still. Mara felt the world narrow to that sound. Tap, tap. Atlas sat and looked at her. The archive door had a small blue shelf mounted beside it for after-hours file drop-offs. It had been painted over during renovations. but a strip of blue still showed along the underside. Hale's face had gone pale enough that even the junior officer behind him noticed. Dr. Nair whispered, "Blue shelf." Mara walked to the door. Her hand hovered near the old drop slot. "Don't," Hale said. This time there was no command in his voice, only fear. Mara reached beneath the shelf and felt tape. Old tape, brittle at the edge. She pulled free a flat envelope, no thicker than a chart. On the front, faded but unmistakable, was Jonah's handwriting. For Mara, if they call her grief a lie. The corridor seemed to stop breathing. Mara held the envelope against her chest, not ready to open it, not ready to learn whether the last 7 years had been built on silence that could have been broken. Atlas leaned against her leg, and behind them, Colonel Hale whispered something no one was supposed to hear. That was supposed to be destroyed. Major alias Grant arrived in a plain dark uniform with no dramatic entrance. He carried a tablet, a pen, and the exhausted expression of a man who had learned that truth usually waited inside poorly labeled folders. By then, the 9-ward entrance had become an unofficial hearing room. Dr. Nair refused to move the materials elsewhere until everything was logged. Caleb stayed beside Atlas. Mara sat in a chair near the medication cart, the envelope resting on the tray across from her like a living thing. Colonel Hale stood near the doorway, no longer smirking, but not defeated. Men like him rarely fell all at once. They retreated into procedure. A civilian nurse has assessed unverified material related to a closed military matter. Grant glanced at Mara, then at Atlas, then at the blue tag. "Good morning to you too, Colonel. This is serious. Most things people try to stop me from reading are." Hale's nostrils flared. Grant turned to Dr. Nair, chain of custody. Dr. Nair handed him the log. Blue tag fell from Colonel Hale's folder in public view. 9 Atlas marked it. Tag led to sealed recovery pouch in cabin SC-12. Opened under dual medical access. Contents documented but not fully reviewed. Envelope recovered from archive door shelf after 9 performed 2-tap indication. Connected to written cue. Grant's pen moved. Witnesses. Dr. Nair looked toward the hall. Half the ward? A few soldiers straightened. Grant nodded. "Good. Crowds are inconvenient until they become useful." Hale cut in. "Major, this dog has been exposed to Nurse Allison. She could have conditioned him." Caleb's expression tightened. "Sir, Atlas transferred here 72 hours ago. Nurse Ellison was not assigned to his intake, but she works in this ward. She was off duty when he arrived. She had access before today." Mara spoke quietly. "I did not know he was coming." Grant looked at her. "Is that true?" "Yes." Hale laughed under his breath. Listen to the trembling voice. "This is exactly what happened before." Mara's hands curled in her lap. Atlas lifted his head. Grant noticed both movements. "What happened before?" Hale answered too quickly. "A young support nurse became emotionally attached to a handler, heard fragments of radio traffic during a difficult event, and later invented a version that blamed command. The board rejected it." Grant looked at Mara. "Your version." For a moment the old fear returned so strongly that Mara could not speak. The ward entrance blurred. She saw the inquiry room again. Hale leaning back, officers avoiding her eyes. Her own statement unfinished on the table. She remembered trying not to cry until someone said Jonah's name with irritation instead of sorrow, as if his death were an administrative delay. Her silence now would be easier. It would also be another grave. Mara lifted her eyes. "I heard Staff Sergeant Vale request confirmation on a route change." He was calm. He asked twice. Colonel Hale answered that the route was clear and told him to proceed. Later, when the outcome was questioned, the official report said Jonah acted without confirmation. "I testified that the report was wrong." "Renton, Spen, stop. And your statement." Colonel Hale said I was compromised by grief. I was dismissed before signing the final transcript. Grant turned to Hale. Is her statement in the inquiry record? Hale's voice cooled. The complete record was reviewed years ago. That is not what I asked. The room changed again. A direct question is a dangerous thing. It gives arrogance no place to sit. Hale folded his arms. I do not carry 7-year-old administrative details in my head. Grant tapped his tablet. Then we'll request them. They are sealed. Seal is not the same as non-existent. Mara looked at the envelope on the tray. She could feel Jonah in the handwriting, in the care of the folded corners, in the way he had left proof, not as revenge, but as protection. He had known Hale might win the first room. He had trusted Atlas to find the second. Grant put on gloves. I'm opening the envelope. Hale stepped forward. I object. This is not a courtroom. It is military evidence. It is potential evidence, Grant said, and you are a subject of the allegation. The word struck like a gavel. Subject, not commander, not authority. Subject. Grant opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of field stationery, a small memory card sealed in plastic, and a second blue label. Dr. Nair read the label aloud because Grant asked her to. Do not play without witness. Hale will say she cried. Ask why he needed that. Mara covered her mouth. Hale's face flushed dark. This is a forgery. Grant looked at the label. You haven't seen the contents. I don't need to. That's an interesting position. Caleb shifted beside Atlas. Major, Atlas is alerting. The dog had risen again, his gaze fixed not on the envelope but on Hale's leather folder, the same folder from which the first tag had fallen. Caleb gave him slack. Atlas walked to Hale. Hale stiffened. Keep that dog away from me. Atlas did not touch him. He sat in front of the folder and stared. Grant asked, Colonel, what is in your folder? Inspection documents. Open it. No. The refusal was so immediate that even Hale seemed to hear it. Grant's voice lowered. Colonel. Hale looked around. Every face in the ward watched him now. The nurses, the soldiers, the photographer, Dr. Nair, Caleb, Mara, and Atlas. For once, Hale could not turn Mara's tears into the center of the story. The dog had moved the center somewhere else. Slowly, Hale opened the folder. Inside were inspection forms, personnel notes, and a sealed brown sleeve marked for disposal. Grant removed it. Hale said, That is unrelated. Atlas placed one paw on the floor beside the sleeve. Grant read the disposal label. Transcript fragment. Witness M. Allison. Duplicate. Do not retain. Mara felt the air leave her lungs. Her statement had existed. It had not vanished by accident. Grant looked at Hale. The colonel's mouth opened, but no sound came. The ward watched a uniformed authority freeze, not because a nurse had cried, but because a dog had quietly guarded the place where his lie began to break. Mara did not remember standing up. One moment she was in the chair, staring at the disposal sleeve that held the ghost of her erased words. The next she was on her feet, one hand pressed against her stomach, fighting the sudden wave of grief that rose through her, like water behind a cracked wall. Her testimony had existed. For 7 years she had wondered whether she had failed Jonah by shaking too hard, speaking too softly, breaking at the wrong moment. Hale had made her believe that pain had ruined her credibility. He had turned tears into a weapon and handed it back to her as shame. But the transcript fragment was real. Someone had written her name. Someone had marked it do not retain. Dr. Nair touched her arm. Mara, I need a minute. She walked into the small medication prep room. Because it was the nearest place with a door, she did not slam it. She closed it carefully. Because even in heartbreak, she remained a nurse, and nurses learned to make their pain quiet so others could keep healing. Inside, she leaned over the counter and breathed through clenched teeth. The room smelled of alcohol, wipes, and clean plastic. A box of syringes sat sealed near the sink. A laminated chart listed dosages for dogs by weight. Ordinary thing, safe thing, nothing like memory. Then the door nudged open. Atlas entered without a sound. Mara laughed once, brokenly. "You're not supposed to open doors." He stepped close and rested his head against her hip. That finished what the transcript had started. Mara sank to the floor beside him and buried both hands in the fur at his neck. She did not sob loudly. She had spent too many years learning silence, but tears came, steady and hot, falling into the old dog's coat while he stood as if guarding not only her body, but the part of her that had been left alone in that inquiry room. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I should have found you. I should have fought harder." Atlas leaned heavier against her. The door remained half open. Caleb stood outside, not entering. "He wouldn't stay with me." Mara wiped her face. "He was always stubborn." Caleb's voice softened. "You knew him well?" She looked at Atlas. "I knew who he loved." Caleb waited. Mara had avoided this story for years, because people always wanted the wrong parts. They wanted drama, blame, details they could turn into distance. They did not know what to do with the ordinary pieces, the last cup of coffee, the borrowed pen, the way Jonah used to tap twice on a doorframe before entering so he would not startle exhausted medics. She gave Caleb one small truth. Jonah Vale asked me to marry him 3 weeks before the report called him reckless. Caleb lowered his eyes. "He was my training officer," he said after a moment. "Not officially. Before Atlas transferred, I read every handler note I could find. Vale's were different, patient, clear. He wrote that a good 9 doesn't obey fear. He obeys trust." Mara smiled through tears. "That sounds like him." In the hallway, voices rose. "Rant, Hale, Dr. Nair." The story was still moving without her. She forced herself up. Caleb stepped back. "You don't have to go out there." "Yes," Mara said. "I do." When she returned to the ward entrance, Major Grant had placed 3 items on separate evidence trays. The blue tag, the R-17 pouch, and Hale's disposal sleeve. The unopened memory card remained sealed. Hale stood rigid near the wall. His authority had not vanished, but it had become brittle. Everyone could hear the strain whenever he spoke. "You are allowing a grief narrative to contaminate a military review," he said. Grant looked up from the tablet. "No, Colonel, I am allowing evidence to disturb a convenient narrative." Dr. Nair's mouth almost curved. Mara stepped back into view. Hale saw her red eyes and seized on them. "There," he said, pointing. "This is what I mean." She cannot separate emotion from fact. Atlas moved before anyone else reacted. He crossed the floor and stood in front of Mara, facing Hale. Not aggressive, not dramatic, calm as a closed door. The ward went still. Grant said, "Colonel, I recommend you stop using her grief as your defense. It seems to be upsetting the witness." Hale looked at Atlas. "The witness is a dog. Then perhaps don't keep provoking him into making your points for you." A murmur moved through the soldiers before discipline swallowed it. Grant held up the memory card. "We need a device not connected to hospital systems." Dr. Nair sent a nurse for one. While they waited, Grant reviewed the transcript fragment. Mara did not ask to see it. She feared the sight of her own old words would break her again. But Grant read one aloud after asking her permission. Witness states Colonel Hale gave the confirmation. Staff Sergeant Vale repeated it back. 9 Atlas was present at the radio table. Mara closed her eyes. She remembered the radio table. Atlas under it, head on his paws, Jonah's hand resting on the dog's collar while Hale spoke. Hale saying later he had never confirmed anything. Hale saying Myra had invented a voice through tears. Grant turned a page. There's a note attached to the fragment. Not yours. Different handwriting. Hale's face sharpened. Grant, read. Witness emotionally unstable. Recommend exclusion from final summary. VH, no one spoke. Initials can be louder than signatures. Hale's control slip. That is standard administrative assessment. Dr. Nair said, calling a grieving witness unstable after removing her statement is standard. I protected the integrity of the inquiry. Mara looked at him then. Really, looked. For years she had imagined confronting Hale with rage. In dreams she shouted. In memories she begged. But now, standing beside Atlas, with Jonah's hidden proof rising piece by piece, she felt something quieter. Pity, not forgiveness, not yet, might be not ever. Pity for a man so afraid of one nurse's truth that he had spent 7 years carrying pieces of it in a folder marked for disposal. The nurse returned with a secure viewer. Grant inserted the memory card. A single audio file appeared. The file name was simple. Harbor for Myra. Hale lunged one step forward. Stop. Atlas stepped into his path. Caleb's hand moved to the leash, but he did not need to tighten it. The 9 stood balanced and calm, body between the colonel and the evidence. Grant looked at Hale. Now, the major said quietly, I definitely want to hear it. The first sound from the recording was static, not dramatic static, not the kind from movies that announces a secret with thunder. It was thin, ordinary feel static, the sound of old equipment doing its best in a hard place. Then Jonah Vale's voice filled the clean hospital ward. Mara, if this reaches you, I'm sorry. Mara's knees weakened. Dr. Nair moved close, but did not touch her unless needed. Atlas pressed against Mara's leg, and she placed one hand on his back. Jonah's voice continued, calm but hurried. I don't have much time to make this clean. You were right at the radio table. The route confirmation came from Colonel Hale. I repeated the order back. Atlas was under the table. 2 knocks means he marked the shelf. Harbor means he goes to safe. The ward held its breath. Mara stared at the small speaker as if the dead could step through sound. There's a duplicate intake note in medical chain because command chain can be broken. I asked Atlas to mark R17 if Hale denied the warning. Mara, listen to me. Your tears are not the problem. His report is. A small sound escaped Mara before she could stop it. Hale's face turned gray. The recording shifted. Another voice came faintly through the background. Distant, clip, unmistakable. Hale, mark it routine. Proceed is cleared. No delay on my authority. Then Jonah again, closer. Confirmed on your authority, Colonel. Hale's recorded voice replied. Confirmed. Move. Grant paused the file. He looked at Hale, and in that look was the collapse of every smirk the Colonel had ever used. Hale spoke, but his voice had lost its blade. Audio can be altered. Grant nodded slowly. It can. That's why we authenticate, but you just tried to stop us before you knew what it contained. Sishan Shirai objected to process. You objected to a dead handler saying the nurse told the truth. Hale looked toward the soldiers, searching for old obedience. He found none. The junior officer stared straight ahead, faces tight. The photographer stood frozen with his camera against his chest, no longer chasing an image, simply witnessing one. Myra wiped her cheek, but this time she did not hide the motion. Hale saw it and made one final mistake. He smiled. It was small and desperate, but it was still cruelty. There it is again. He said, tears, always tears. That how she gets rooms to bend, Atlas. Never that. He did not snarl, lunge, or bare his teeth. He simply stepped fully in front of Mara, squared his shoulders, and planted himself between the colonel and the nurse with such quiet certainty that the entire ward understood it. The dog was not confused. The dog was not performing. Atlas was guarding her from the lie. Caleb whispered, "Atlas, stay." Atlas already had. Hale took another step, reaching toward the evidence tray. "That card is inadmissible until verified." Atlas placed one paw on the lower edge of the tray stand, not touching the evidence, not disturbing it, just blocking the hand that wanted to take it. Rand's voice went cold. "Colonel Hale, step back." Hale looked at him. "You are choosing a nurse and a dog over a commanding officer?" Rand answered without raising his voice. "I am choosing documented evidence, a suppressed witness statement, a recovered chain of custody tag, and your own recorded order over your convenience." The words struck the room one at a time. Documented, suppressed, recovered, recorded. Hale stepped back. For the first time since Mara had known him, he looked smaller than his rank. Rand resumed the audio. Jonah's voice returned. "If I don't make it back, don't let them tell you Atlas forgot. He doesn't forget safe. He doesn't forget truth when truth has a scent, a route, a command, a hand. Mara, forgive yourself. You warned us. You stayed steady." Mara bowed her head. The recording ended with two soft taps. Tap, tap. Then Jonah's final word. "Harbor." Atlas sat. The command still lived in him. Dr. Nair turned away briefly, eyes bright. Caleb pressed his lips together. One of the junior officers removed his cap. Another followed. Then a nurse near the doorway did the same with her hand over her heart. Hale stared at the floor. Rand sealed the memory card. Pending authentication. Colonel Hale is relieved of authority over this review. You will surrender the folder and remain available for formal questioning. Hale's head snapped up. "You can't relieve me. I can recommend immediate suspension of command access based on evidence interference." Grant held out his hand. The folder, for a long moment. Hale did not move. Then Atlas stood again. The dog walked to Hale, stopped at a respectful distance, and lowered his nose toward the colonel's polished boot. Something was stuck to the sole. A strip of blue tape, the same tape used on R-17. Hale looked down too late. Caleb crouched and removed it carefully. Under the tape was a tiny folded label, worn thin by age and pressure. It must have come loose from somewhere Hale had stepped that morning. Perhaps from the disposal sleeve. Perhaps from the folder he had carried into the ward so confidently. Rand unfolded it. His expression hardened. He read aloud. Final summary altered. Nurse statement removed by VH original retained in brown sleeve until disposal. The room went utterly silent. Hale whispered, "That is not mine." Mara looked at him, tears still on her face, but her voice was clear. "Then why did Atlas find it on you?" No one moved. No one defended him. The lie had spent 7 years wearing a uniform. Now a calm old 9 had placed it at the colonel's feet. Colonel Victor Hale did not collapse. People like him rarely gave rooms that satisfaction. He straightened his jacket. He lifted his chin. He tried to gather what remained of command around him like a cloak. But the ward had changed too completely for the old shape of fear to fit. Major Grant gave instructions in a measured voice. The folder was sealed. The disposal sleeve was photographed. The memory card was transferred into secure evidence custody. Dr. Nair logged Atlas, indications as observed, behavioral responses. Careful not to turn the dog into a machine or a myth. "He is not testifying," she said, when one young officer asked if a 9 could be considered a witness. "He is revealing trained associations connected to physical evidence." There is a difference. Mara heard that and loved her for it. Atlas did not need to become more than a dog to matter. He did not need human words. His loyalty was enough. His training was enough. His memory, carried through scent, command, route, and trust, had done what human pride refused to do. It had led them back to the truth. Hale surrendered his folder with hands that no longer looked steady. As Grant reviewed the contents, more fragments surfaced. A copy of Mara's partial transcript. A note recommending that her testimony be excluded from the final inquiry summary. A routing slip showing R17 had been requested by Hale's office years earlier, then marked missing. Each page made the same quiet accusation. Mara had not been unreliable. She had been inconvenient, and Jonah Vale had known it. When Grant finished the first review, he faced the ward. "This matter will proceed through formal channels," he said. "No one here is to discuss restricted evidence outside authorized reporting. But I will state what is clear within this room. Nurse Mara Ellison's dismissed statement was not imaginary. It was recorded, removed, and retained outside the final summary. That removal is now under investigation." The words did not bring Jonah back. Mara had thought, once that clearing, his name would feel like sunlight. Instead, it felt like opening a room that had been locked too long. Air rushed in, but dust rose with it. Relief and grief moved together. Caleb removed his cap and faced her. Nora shook her head. "You didn't do it." "No, but I believe the report." That honesty hurt more than an excuse would have. Mara looked at the young handler who had inherited a dog with a history he could not fully read. Most people did. Caleb swallowed. Atlas didn't. The old nine stood beside her, calm and patient, as if all of this had been a long command finally completed. Dr. Nair approached Mara with the small ribbon pin Hale had made her remove that morning. Mara had forgotten it in the pocket of her sweater. The doctor held it out on her palm. "You dropped this earlier," Dr. Nair said. Mara took it. The ribbon had been given to her by Jonah's mother after the funeral. A quiet thank you from a woman who knew Mara had loved her son, but did not know the full weight of what had been taken afterward. Mara had never worn it for attention. She wore it to remember that someone in Jonah's family still believed her silence was grief, not guilt. Her fingers closed around the pin. Across the hall, 2 military police officers arrived. They did not handcuff Hale. There was no spectacle. They simply stood beside him while Grant spoke in low tones. Hale listened, face stiff, eyes avoiding Mara. Then, just before leaving, he looked at her. For years, Mara had imagined that moment too. She imagined him begging, apologizing, breaking. He did none of those things. He said, "You should have stayed out of command business." Mara felt at last lean into her. She stepped forward only enough to be heard. "You should have stayed out of the truth." Hale's eyes flickered. The officers escorted him down the corridor. No applause followed. It would have been wrong somehow. This was not a victory built for cheering. It was a grave being cleared of weeds, a name being washed, a woman being handed back the part of herself that had been taken in public and buried in paperwork. When Hale disappeared around the corner, the ward remained silent. Then Major Grant turned to Mara and removed his cap. It was not theatrical. It was not large, but one by one, the soldiers near the entrance followed. Caleb, the junior officers, the older sergeant by the wall. Even the photographer lowered his camera and bowed his head. Mara stood in the clean doorway of the Hospital 9 unit, tears on her face, the ribbon in her hand, and Atlas at her side. This time, no one mocked her. Dr. Nair said softly, "Mara, would you like to give him the command?" Mara looked down at Atlas. For 7 years, Harbor had lived in her memory as Jonah's word, a private ache, a door she could not open because every time she tried, Hale's voice came back telling her grief had made her unreliable. Now the word waited in the air, not as pain, but as proof. Mara knelt. Atlas lowered his head until their foreheads touched. she whispered. Harbor. The old dog exhaled and sat close enough that his shoulder pressed against her chest. Safe? That was what Jonah had said. He knows where safe is. Mara's tears came again, but they no longer felt like something being used against her. They were not evidence of weakness. They were evidence that love had survived ridicule, silence, paperwork, rank. Caleb crouched nearby. He can stay assigned to St. Arden, he said. Dr. Nair already approved long-term comfort placement in the ward program. I'll remain his handler of record, but he glanced at Atlas leaning into Mara. I think he made his preference clear. Dr. Nair nodded. Atlas will work light duty only. Quiet visits, recovery support, no pressure. Mara stroked the gray around Atlas' muzzle. Have you? Dr. Nair said. Mara looked toward the brass plates along the wall. Names of nines who had served. Names that had been honored because someone remembered to write them down. Soon Jonah's corrected report would begin a slow journey through offices, signatures, reviews, and official language. It would not heal everything. It would not return the years stolen from his name or from Mara's heart, but it would change the record, and records mattered because one day a stranger would read Jonah Val's name and not see reckless. They would see confirmed, trusted, truthful. They would see that the nurse who cried had been right. Later that afternoon, after the ward emptied and the inspection was canceled, Mara returned to the doorway where it had all begun. The floor had been cleaned. The evidence trays were gone. The blue tag had been sealed away. Nothing remained of the morning except the feeling that the walls themselves had witnessed justice. Atlas stood beside her. Mara pinned the ribbon back onto her sweater. Her hand did not shake. A young nurse passing with fresh towels paused. Nurse Ellison. Mara turned. The nurse looked nervous, then said, I'm glad you didn't stop crying. Mara's throat tightened. She smiled. Me too. Atlas tapped the floor twice with one paw. Tap, tap. Mara looked down through fresh tears, and this time she laughed. Not loudly, not without sorrow, but freely. In the clean hospital 9-unit doorway, where Colonel had mocked her grief, a dog had guarded her from a lie. And the truth, silent for 7 years, finally came home. Some heroes speak in reports, some in testimony, and some, like Atlas, speak by standing quietly between a wounded heart and the lie meant to bury it. They were love refusing to disappear. If this story moved you, share where you are watching from and subscribe to Silent Valor 9 for more stories of loyalty, justice, and hidden courage.